Live in Corporate is brought to you by Pfizer. Every day, Pfizer colleagues work across developed and emerging markets to advance wellness, prevention, treatments, and cures that challenge the most feared diseases of our time. For more than 170 years, Pfizer has worked to make a difference for all of those who rely on them. Learn more at Pfizer.com. What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Live in Corporate, and it's an interesting season. You look around, and you're seeing these tech brands, and really like the working corporate elite, push back. They're pushing back against a lot of the narratives and notions that were shared just a couple of years ago around more effective balance between work and life, livable wages, benefits that make sense for people with families and who don't have families, common dignity, and other just modicums of respect at work. You're seeing them push back against this with these layoffs that don't really make any sense. You see them push back against this with their constant desire to erode an already fairly hollow position, which is corporate diversity, equity, inclusion. And you see them push back against the worker by really attacking the most marginalized worker, which are black and brown people. Now, we're not going to see any hard data on this right now, but I wager if you were to do some sort of poll or analysis on the demographic of people laid off during these latest rounds of layoffs, from Amazon to Spotify to Meta to SurveyMonkey to Google, that you would see a trend and a pattern that the people mostly laid off are non-white men. It's important in these seasons that we remember the goal should be, the goal for me, the goal for Living Corporate, and the goal for the people that I try to welcome on Living Corporate's network, either as guests or as contributors. We're seeking to change the system. We're looking to reimagine and recreate something. We're not looking to change our position in something. It kind of reminds me when I was in middle school. I remember the line at the cafeteria being so long. It was just one line. It was so long because we broke them out lunch periods. And I recall that if you were a favorite of the line monitor, who was this woman who was a volunteer at the school, then you could get to the front. And if you were hurt, if you were injured in some way, you could get to the front. But it wasn't, that rule, even that injury rule, wasn't really applied the same to everybody. But I remember once I got cool one day with this parent's kid, and I happened to get hurt because I was playing football, I was able to jump in front of the line. And I jumped in front of the line, and I remember looking back and seeing all these other kids, some of them who were also hurt, but weren't next to me. And I didn't care because I was first. I was higher in the line. I was able to get my food, sit down. And I'm going to tell y'all something. There's nothing really redeemable about selfishness like that. It's not. And I know, like, we live in this world where we're taught to be selfish. We're taught to look out for yourself. You're taught to whatever you need to do, even if that means stepping on somebody else, get yours. Like, we're taught that. We're encouraged to move and behave and think that way. But that's a destructive level of thinking in a society in a society. We all depend on each other. And the reality is, a lot of us chase this carrot of potentially one day, perhaps maybe, being a part of that ruling class. So we're willing to swallow and take whatever we need to take because our lottery ticket is right here. It just hasn't been called yet. And I'm going to tell you, the goal for us, for here, when I say us, Living Corporate, and frankly for any leader who considers themselves passionate about workplace fairness, equity, whatever term you want to use, they have to have a mind towards shifting and changing the systems and not just rearranging the seats or line positions in the system. Look, with that being said, I'm really excited about, the conversation you're going to hear today. I've been wanting to talk to this person now for some years, and I appreciate their time. John Graham Jr., a lot of things, right? Speaker, coach, executive consultant, writer, he's brilliant. And we have a really frank conversation just about this state that we're in, this corporate context that we're in right now, and the confluence of economic, quote unquote, concerns and anxieties to historical patterns. This is not our first time being here, to what we really should be looking forward to, like what's next. And I'm honored that John was able to take the time to be on Living Corporate. I hope that y'all enjoy the conversation, and I look forward to talking to you in a minute after we come back from the interview. Okay? See you soon. The Antigen podcast returns with a 3-part miniseries spotlighting maternal immunization. When it comes to vaccine development, there's been a shifting paradigm. Help protect pregnant women and their infants through research rather than from research. Join us this season to dive deeper into this topic, the history, challenges, innovations, and exciting developments to come. Subscribe and listen to The Antigen, powered by Pfizer, on your favorite podcast app. John, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, Zach. I'm well, man. In the moment, in this very moment, I am well. Thank you.
It's interesting because Living Corporate has been around since 2018. We exist to center and amplify Black and brown folks at work. And we talk to all types of folks. We've talked to all manner of executives, activists, elected official, public servant, authors, educators, civil servants, blah, 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 influencers. It's interesting though, because we don't always have a lot of frank conversations about the experience of Black men in corporate America with other Black men. I could probably count them on one hand, and we've had almost 1,000 shows. And so, I guess I'd love to understand more about your experience in the corporate space and really what led you to write your book, Plantation Theory, The Black Professional Struggle Between Freedom and Security. We can get to the book, but I really want to understand the background and what was the influence and your experience to even say, you know what, I gotta document, so I gotta write this down.
Yeah, well, it's a long and winding journey to get there, but my experience in corporate was born out of trying to achieve what my father had achieved in success in corporate, right? So it was kind of programmed, go to college, get a degree, get a good job, work 30 years, retire, and go off into the sunset. Going into corporate, however, I didn't have the conversations ahead of time, which honestly, I had later in my career, with my father about what I would experience, right? What was the landscape, and what were some of the psychological, emotional, triggers or traumas that I would experience as a Black man in corporate. And so I had to walk that path on my own. And so, being in corporate, you recognize, I think, almost immediately that this space is different than what you would think it was or what you were taught it would be. Meaning how you're received, how you're perceived, how you have to navigate whose egos you have to tiptoe around, whose fragility and comfortability you have to maintain awareness of at all times. And those experiences over time build up, I think, a tremendous amount of resilience, but at the same time, it's exhausting. It's draining, and then you factor in that we are, by epigenetic coding, programmed for excellence, right? Like, we don't know how to operate in a mediocrity. And so that battery, and I came from an HBCU, Lincoln University, that battery is putting your back around excellence just from the first day you step foot on hallowed grounds, right? So we're coming into these spaces thinking that we have to shine, excel, exceed, operate to the highest levels, and then we will be commensurately rewarded, paid, elevated, and so forth, only to find out there's a whole other game that we were never made privy to. So those are the backdrops to the book itself.
So much there you said is just, it resonates with me because you and I are in the same demographic, right? In a couple different ways. But I think one thing you said around just part of navigating corporate America as a Black professional, and this is not to say that Black men have it harder than Black women, or that Black men are not the most straight presenting Black men, are not the most privileged group within the Black cohort in the working space, because we are, and not but, and that doesn't change the fact that there are challenges in showing up as a Black man in the workplace, right? And so much you said you said like comfortability and fragility. And so something I've been realizing is that I used to think up until maybe like a year ago, 6 months ago, even, John, is okay, racism is real. Yes. And white supremacy is definitely real. Living corporate wouldn't exist if I didn't think those things were true. And though, if you're generating revenue, if you're delivering quantitative impact, you will have some level of support, protection, or whatever. They can't really touch you if you're supporting. And that's not true, right? Your Black success in the corporate space is not really driven by, it's going to sound really pessimistic, but I'd love to get your reaction. Black success in the corporate space is not really driven by your quantitative results. It's driven by how much white folks are comfortable around you.
Bing. Message.
Right?
Now, you nailed that one. No, it's interesting you say that. I just did 2 workshops for a very large financial institution this last week, and the talk was called The Cost of the Climb. And one of the questions I pose in that workshop is, do you still believe that your value is directly connected to your output? And this concept of us being us perceiving our value to be the outputs of our work or our labor is 400 or 500 years in the making, right? Mm-hmm. Like, when you dig into the history of it, which I pride myself on doing, is connecting those dots between history and our modern day lived experience. You have to first start at why we were brought to this country in the first place. And that was to work harder than any human being has ever worked. So yes, your value was directly tied to your labor outputs. Well, that gets passed down generation after generation after generation after generation. And then here we are today, thinking that when we get in these spaces, that when we exceed every metric, we, implement strategies that reduce cost and increase top and bottom line revenue and all these things, that somehow that will be the measure, the bellwether of our successes, when honestly performance is about 10% of success in corporate America. When you look at those who are actually successful, right? Then you like 30% is image and brand perception, and 70% is exposure and relationship. And relationship is dependent on who you have access to and who deems you valuable enough for whatever positioning that person who's tapping you is trying to to achieve for their benefit. Then so goes your opportunity to gain access.
And it's just interesting, like you presume, and there's something about like, again, like we'll get into your book because I want to talk a little bit about like, I want to talk a little bit more about the title, but like, we've had other guests on, like Dr. Caitlin Rosenthal, who wrote the book Accounting for Slavery, and the point of us having her on was I really wanted to talk about like the historicity of these organizational models and how they tie back to chattel slavery. Even like some of the delegation, the ways that Black folks, most times I've seen in my career, is like Black folks have the most power over other Black folks, right? They're not necessarily they're not necessarily telling Bob and them over in accounting what to do, but they'll make sure to get the little Black folks in line over here, right? But there's something also about like, even in the like the word plantation, like for me, I always think about like internalized white supremacy. Even you think about like just back in the day, like in running these plantations, like there had to be some level of self-regulation that slaves had to have for plantations to even run, because we outnumbered everybody several times over.
100%.
And so
100%. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. And so I'll land the plane. It's just so much of this space and this work is like, it's internalized, right? Like, man, what would it look like? I was just talking to another guest. I don't know. We'll see when this episode drops. But I was talking to somebody about like, man, what would happen if like all the Black folks just got together and said, you know what, we're all going to go to the one or two Black psychiatrists that we know. We're all going to be written. We're all going to get formal diagnosis for PTSD. We're all going to go to our jobs, medical space, and we're all going to submit medical health leave, even if it's and we're going to take whatever we're granted. If we're granted 2 weeks, if we're granted a month, if we're granted 3 months, whatever. If all the Black, if let's just say half the Black folks in corporate America did that, like what would change? You know what I'm saying? Okay. But like people get scared, right? In terms of just like, well, now we gotta, there's this level of we're not worthy. We have to kind of stay in line, and we'll regulate each other. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm clearly, hopefully you can tell I'm excited and to have this conversation.
Oh, for sure. And look, the position on the plantation was called the driver. The driver was elevated from the enslaved population on the plantation to serve right underneath an overseer. Right. So elevating their status to be a manager in place of or in the stead of an overseer, again, is not new. To your point, the self-regulation starts at the psychological level to essentially incentivize this division that enables somebody who looks like you to not see you as themselves. And so that is critical, right? The divide and conquer didn't start just by going in and driving wedges between different communities over on the continent. It started by driving divisions within households, right? Mother and sons and daughters and cousins, and then you have this notion of seeing yourself as different than those who look just like you. So this is deeper than strategies and DEI to figure out. This is a 6th century psychological reprogramming that's required. And to your point, what if we did all get together? But then I always say, well, we can't even agree on, who the best MCs are, let alone,
oh, brother,
let alone, let alone who's going to activate this movement towards resistance in some small fashion, right? Yeah. So,
I mean, we can't even agree. You kept it light. I'm gonna go further. Like, we can't even agree as to who should be a part of our movement to be free, right? Like, this idea, right? So it's like, okay, well, nah, only it hurts my heart, man. Sometimes, like, I'll read some great thought leadership on Black liberation or just like the need for community, and then from those same people will then discount or dismiss the identity and experience of queer black folks. And it's like, look, like we're all coming from the same people. Like, we all need each other to move forward. Historically, queer black folks are the reason so many of us even have freedom today. Like, think about like all the folks involved in the civil rights movement. We need one another, right? So, yeah, I mean, you're right. And so much of that is like also part of like just like this internalized patriarchy and white supremacy of like continuing to want to divide and kind of step on one another. I guess I'm curious though, like you've been in this space for a while, like, and you've written it's a New York Times bestseller. Like, could you point to a specific moment that you said, okay, I'm going to write this book. Like, I'm going to write about like the struggle of navigating the corporate space. I'm going to write about my own identity and like the role it plays in this work. Like, was there a lightning rod moment that you could point to?
There were several. And interestingly, I started writing the book, probably like 2018. And just pieces here and there, right? Just like loose thoughts that I parked for a while. And I had started to work on this documentary that I was going to do within one of the organizations that I was at. And it was called Switched. And Switched was essentially about not just code switching, but also, the realities and the daily lived experiences of Black professionals within corporate spaces. And so after getting the green light and then presenting like a 5-minute trailer of what it could be, budget got pulled. So I was like, yeah,
oh, wow.
All right. Because it was that real, and this particular organization wasn't ready. Right. And that's fair. It's their money. They're not ready to take that honest look in the mirror. Cool. So the outline for the documentary, each of the topics that would drive conversation for the people being interviewed ended up becoming the chapter outline for plantation theory. And so the concept of plantation theory, or even the title itself, and the Black professional struggle between freedom and security came much later, post George Floyd's murder. And the reason why, it all came together was after, in the early weeks after his killing, all of the open dialogue or open forum conversations and courageous conversations that were happening, not only within the company I was at, but also colleagues that I would talk to. And, you're hearing a similar theme, and regardless of generation, and interestingly, specific to generation, I would hear older Black professionals say that they had never seen anything like this, where they had the ability to voice their lived experiences to the highest ranking people in the organization. And they were willingly being sought out to share these experiences. And so I was like, wow, that's amazing that after, in this case, 56 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64, that this is the first time that people are experiencing this ability to have that level of open dialogue. And so these struggles, but then also what I would hear is people having so much talent, so much passion, energy, and expertise and sauce that they bring to these organizations knowing that they aren't being utilized to their full potential, in fact, being suppressed, but being deathly afraid of stepping away from these positions or these companies to start their own. And that lands them in the struggle between freedom and security, right? And so it all came together. Now, plantation theory, the statement that stops a lot of people in their tracks when they're looking at the cover, is based on the fact that after the Emancipation Act of 1865, you had 4.5 million newly freed Black folks in this country with no safety nets, right? No place to live, no viable means of supporting themselves, no health care, no jobs, no savings, right? None of that. Mm-hmm. And so within the first year, you had over 1.5 million die, right? Due to starvation, neglect, and disease. You had a few that, a few 100,000 that migrated east, west, north, and abroad. But the vast majority of folks went back to plantations, now working as sharecroppers, right, or tenant farmers and so forth, which was the evolved version of slavery without calling it slavery. And so that concept for me hit hard, because I'm like, damn, even being released by law or legislatively didn't secure this idea of what freedom was, because we didn't have a model for it. We didn't know what it was to be fully free, right? We'd see what we were denied, but we didn't know what the experience was. And so we went back to what we knew, that which was secure and provided at least a means of sustaining ourselves. So that is what I connect dots between, is that moment in history to where we are today, and still not being psychologically, emotionally, spiritually empowered enough to leave the plantation, because of these very real obligations that we have financially.
There's so much there around, man, like the fear that we have, and like that fear is founded, right? Like it's founded in reality, right? Of like, look, the data shows that Black folks they have a higher unemployment rate when it comes to layoffs, as we're seeing right now. Now, we're never going to see the data out. We're not going to see the data outright off top, but you can look. You can use your eyes. And if if you know anything about the organization on the inside, you'll see that Black and brown folks are disparately impacted by these layoffs in tech, right? Like, so,
absolutely.
Right. So like, we're the first ones, we're the last ones in, the first ones out, in terms of some of these opportunities. Again, like our time to find a new role is much longer than our white counterparts. We're more often put on PIPs and things of that nature. Yeah, I mean, like, it's almost like we're always on a tightrope, or like we're trying to like walk on a bubble.
That's real. That's very real. And again, not by accident, right? These are things that when you look at the business model has not changed, right? The capitalist model for business is purely high productivity and profitability at low cost overhead, right? So when you look at it from purely cold calculated business decisions, they're looking at balance sheets. Now, who's the first to go? Well, who's historically been expendable? And these decisions aren't even, hard to calculate, right? And so you look at value-driven roles versus labor, repeatable, repetitive process, and what they deem more valuable. And again, we don't have the relationships a lot of times to land us somewhere else before, the writing's on the wall, because we think it's about our performance. So all of these things are tied, man. And we end up the victims of the cycle. And oh, by the way, we're competing very much like 1866, competing with foreign labor sources, right? Immigration policy has always capped the amount of Black folks that come into the country, right? And it also enabled other low-cost sources of labor from around the world to come to this country to replace what was once, quote-unquote, free labor. No accident today who runs IT divisions for the most part, who are the most represented, let's say. who are coming into, who are in the STEM fields and coming in from out of the country to populate those. Like, these things are all connected.
Like there's so much to say even about like this tech space, right? And like this boom, like as the tech space was booming and there was all these opportunities and like opportunities to come in and be a coder and things of that nature. And like, I'm never going to poo-poo Black folks getting into STEM and coding. My question always was, okay, like when it comes to these roles, like what are we actually doing? Are we just like running tasks like in a tech environment, or are we like generating value? Because like those are two different roles, right? Like if what we're doing is if what we're doing is the equivalent of like, laying bricks or mopping floors, or then like when it comes to cutting folks, we're gonna get cut. And as you think about like as automation continues, those roles are going to be the first things that are gone. So what does it look like? And again, I'm not against teaching, getting us in these spaces, but like, what does it look like for us to get above the lowest common, like the lowest denominator in this industry, right? And so we're seeing it now. I'm just looking anecdotally. When you look at these layoffs and stuff, like a lot of us are being impacted, and it's like, because those roles are expendable, or they found a script that can do that, or they found some new piece of tech that can do that and do it faster with less errors, whatever the case is. And so like,
sure,
it's so like, we could probably talk ad nauseum about the realities of like our experience, how oppression has set us up and continues to defraud and defund us. I'm curious as to like, as you look at like leadership, executive leadership cultures today, let's just say between now and 2030, like what points of accountability do you place on them? And what does it look like to create an environment, a workplace environment that is truly equitable? And like, I'll ask another question on top of that, make it even more jumbled. Is
okay.
There's this fear that a lot of white folks have that like, if we push too hard or we keep on going down this path of equity at work, I'm going to end up being displaced. I'm going to lose my seat. I'm going to lose my slice of the pie. My response to all that is, yeah, you will. But again, I'm just curious, like, what does it look like to hold executive organizations accountable? And what does it look like to like rebalance and redistribute power so that historically oppressed folks are, they're getting what they need?
Yeah. Oh, you threw a lot out there. So here's the short answer, and I'll unpack it. There is no historical reference for the most privileged, powerful, and highly status people of any civilization in the known world that have ever given up privilege, power, or status willingly. It's never happened. We are kidding ourselves to think that DEI somehow is going to achieve what has never been achieved in history. And that's asking the most privileged, powerful, and highly status people in these organizations to give those things up. What I suggest, an even deeper point that you brought up, was the fear, which I actually center, right? So I don't believe in white supremacy. It's a myth. It doesn't exist. What I do believe in is white insecurity, which drives the behavior of what we've seen in the constructs they've built. And so this goes, again, historically back to the underpinnings of European society, like pre-civilized societies. And you're talking about food insecurity, land insecurity, power insecurity, religious insecurity, all of these things, even, what's the word? Genetic insecurity, right? And then you fast forward and they see, come into contact with these Black folks from a continent that's so resource rich, they don't have to import anything. And that clash of have versus have not, abundance versus lack, mixed with those who were insecure gaining knowledge of Chinese gunpowder technology and the ability to kill more effectively and efficiently at a distance. So now what you end up having is this insecure group of people with power and technology that can kill en masse, and therefore they then mistake themselves as superior. So if we start with that as the premise, then you can see the construct they build to insulate their insecurities, make themselves dominant, hoard resources, establish education that indoctrinates others to believe they are dominant. That's all based on insecurity. The people who have the most are the most afraid to lose it, right? In that construct. So that is our backdrop. Now you fast forward to this question of, should we be training and educating people to get into these spaces? And I say, why do we continue to try to make white spaces safe instead of focusing on making black spaces? Right. Mm-hmm. And that is a mindset shift that we have yet to get back to since pre-integration. And so now I'm like, yes, train and educate in these things. But before we rush to go off and give all of that expertise and perspective and, labor to somebody else's endeavor, why aren't we thinking, how do we build our own first? And that's a question that we still have yet to answer. Now you're seeing more entrepreneurs, sure, but then you run into funding and, VC cap tables being open to us and all these things. Okay, cool. But this is where together comes back. So this idea of community, which I hear tossed around a lot, and I look at community in the sense of how Dr. Claude Anderson defines it. First and foremost, having your own turf, but then secondly, having a code of conduct, ethics, values, morals, world beliefs, and ideals that bind us together and obligate us communally. We don't have those things. So until those things happen, then the economic base that's built off community is going to be fleeting at best, right? Regardless of how educated, well-trained we are, and how successful some of us become, if it doesn't matriculate back to this communal obligation and benefit, then we're still playing behind the eight ball of every other culture who has recognized that they're on the same team.
Well, and I think the challenge, John, that you're talking about is that, like, and I've said this before, is like a lot of us, we really don't want to be free. Like, we want to be white, right? Like, we don't.
Well, how do you define free first? That's the biggest question.
1,000%.
If you ask 10, what is freedom? 9 times out of 10, they defer to financial freedom. And that's one aspect of it in this construct. But, we're not free to do a lot of things we think we are. Kyrie found that out quick, fast.
And that's the thing. And I think that's the piece too, is like, that changed, right? I was reading Bell Hooks about love. Like, mm-hmm. I've been reading and coming back to it.
Sure.
But she talks about even like just the history of like the civil rights movement and like how black folks really define freedom and how like love kind of continue to step away and then she quoted Cornel West and his analysis about how, we started pivoting away from really like political and like communal power and started really replacing everything with like, it was like, well, money is the way that money, economic freedom is the freest freedom. It's like the biggest thing. And it's like, I don't like to your point, it's kind of like, I try to get that too. It's like, well, we see plenty of like wealthy black people make a mistake or do something and be held at a much more extreme point of accountability than their white counterparts, or say the wrong thing and be wrong. Now, to be clear, be wrong. And then see like suddenly everything like stop, you know what I'm saying? In a way that we don't see from like the Mel Gibsons of the world. Right. So like or the Brett Favres of the world. And so like, I just think that, like you're 100% right. Right. Like we don't have to be wealthy to be free, and we don't have to, but like this idea of like, again, like I say, when I say like we want to be white is like, we see white men, straight white men and then straight white women at the top of the privilege pyramid. And our idea is not to necessarily dismantle anything. We just want to switch spots with them. We want them to be where we're at. We want to be where they're at. And it's like, that's not, right. That's just not it, John.
Right. That should not be the goal. Right. But it's funny. So what you said is spot on, bro. It's like, the switch to economic empowerment, around the time of civil rights, was because we had community already, right? By force, by legislation. So that was absolutely correct at that time for that operating system. Mm-hmm. Well, they said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and upgrade your operating system to be integrated, which they knew, right, at no cost to them at a governmental level would dismantle Black community and self-sufficiency, right? So now I'm going to invite you into mine. So you spend every dollar in my institutions or my establishments, and that then breeds this opportunity for you to separate yourself from yourself by means of socioeconomics, and that's exactly what happened. So it became I instead of we, and so, but we never flipped the switch off of economic empowerment because we finally had access. Well, we lost community, so now economic empowerment doesn't have the same impact because, to your point, when a few of us make it, how easily can it be stripped? Right. And who's going to support them? Nobody. They're an individual rather than a collective. So if we had communal obligation and those values and principles that bound us together, if one rose, you would see many more rise behind, or you would see those financial wins matriculate to vertically integrated businesses that support the community, right? And that community then expands.
There's something also like to that end, right? Like, it's so interesting how our view of community now is so capitalistic, right? So like, oh, hey, let's build this community, and then I'm gonna sell stuff to y'all. Y'all gonna buy stuff from me, as opposed to like, hey, let's build this community that's like actually collective. Let's organize and leverage our collective power to go achieve something together, right? I think about like, I think about just, there's so many businesses out there right now where we like, it's this idea like, hey, we all gonna come together, we gonna build Black Wall Street, but like, and like these narratives around Black Wall Street, but they don't really matriculate, John, past like, again, let's sell to each other. It's never like hey, let's build something that we can then license to these multi-billion, trillion-dollar companies, and let like it's B2C, 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 and like, I don't know, man, sure. John, like I'm just not a big believer of that. Like I don't know if unless it's like food, which even then I'm kind of like, you really probably should be giving your food away. But like, let's just say if it's food or like something that's like, I don't know. I just don't know if I believe in like making and eating off of Black people, like eating off of historically marginalized people, because these corporations have so much money that you should be able to have some type of strategy where you're driving and you're selling and getting money from you're extracting from these organizations. I mean, like, do you have a point of view on that? Because like we're seeing that more and more, right? Where it's like, hey, let me sell to, like, it's a lot of like kind of like we're hustling each other. Like, am I tripping on that?
Not at all. Not at all. But again, where do I go with this? There's a couple things. One, that is only replicating the very construct that got us where we are today, right? If we're going to use capitalism to now build community, well, you have to take all that comes with that, and capitalism's built on a disconnect from humanity. First, you have to be able to make cold, calculated, inhumane decisions for the benefit of profit and the survival of the business. So if that's the way we're going to try and achieve community and unity, we've already failed. We have to figure out first and foremost that we're not going to out capitalism those who are already in position to own the space. That's a losing proposition from the get-go. Secondly, I love the concept of Black Wall Street. And, you ask, again, 10 Black folks if they would love to see a resurgence of this of a Black Wall Street, and everybody's like, hell yeah, right, immediately. But then I ask, okay, well, what were some of the founding principles or binding principles that made their community strong in the first place? I don't know. Well, that's the problem, because we look at Black Wall Street's success as the outcome, but don't know the underpinnings of what made that community so strong in the first place. And yes, okay, we know that geographically where they were, it was rich in oil resources, right, and mineral resources. So that's one thing, but it starts with having a turf. We don't have one. Mm-hmm. So even the concept of Black Wall Street doesn't just start with us selling goods to each other. You have to live somewhere first. Food, shelter, water, right? That's the beginning of basis of life. So okay, cool. If we had that, then what are the obligations, requirements, and commitments that we would make of those who want to live in said community, right? This resurgence of a new Black community like a Tulsa. Well, do we have those? I even call it like, okay, what if we had a homeowners association agreement that you'd have to sign, and here are the things within the HOA that you have to abide by to be a member of this community? You know, I've tried to have that conversation many a times, and it's a stop and start. We usually can't get very far in that conversation because, again, what are we trying to do that doesn't just emulate what we've already seen?
Yeah, man.
And so this, I say, that cross-cultural connection between those who still live in, communally obligated communities abroad and in the diaspora, we need that help. And they need our help from certain instances as well. So there's a lot that we need to have conversations about, and it doesn't start with buying Black and economic empowerment. It starts with, first and foremost, why do I look at you and not trust you?
Right.
Because you can't transact with people you don't trust.
Right.
Like, we have to start first and foremost a healthy Black psychology in developing that.
Jeez, John, man, look, I told you off mic we was gonna have to do a part 2. Look. This is a dope conversation, man. Like, before I let you go, man, like, where can people find you? Where can people buy the book? Like, we can put all the links in the show notes, but I'm gonna give you a second to plug everything you need to plug.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, bro. It's I'm always honored to be even asked to join, first and foremost, but living corporate is a luminary space. So thank you for having me. I'm all over LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to connect with me. But plantationtheory.com is the best place to support the book directly. I mean, I know it's convenient and easy to give your money to Mr. Bezos and company, but if you'd like to get a signed copy of your book and support the author directly, plantationtheory.com is the best way to do so.
I love it. John, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. We can't wait to have you back. Look, man, enjoy yourself. I'm 80% of Black folks are lactose intolerant. I'm going to go ahead and assume that you are too. But look, man, pray and enjoy yourself. Go crazy.
Just because you gave me the permission, sir, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go hard, and I'm going to pay for it on Friday morning. Yes.
I'll talk to you soon, brother.
All right, cheers, man. Thank you.
And we're back. Listen, again, John Graham Jr., links in the show notes. Make sure you connect with him, learn more about him, follow him on all things social, and just make sure you stay connected. Listen, I cannot stress enough, right, that like, I'm pausing because I'm trying to figure out if I want to say this, but I forgot that I own Living Corporate, so I'm going to say what I want. The reality is that a lot of Black folks, and I said this in the conversation with John, but I'm going to say it again, it bears repeating. A lot of Black folks really, they don't see freedom as a goal, or rather the way that they define freedom is just fundamentally different than the way that I define freedom. And frankly, like, I've had like my own challenges with Black people in other roles in my career, because I would reach out to them thinking that we had the same definition of liberation, but we didn't. a lot of black folks don't really want to be free. Not really. Like they don't want to be unencumbered by the white gaze. They don't want to necessarily be unshackled from Western concepts of behavior or quote unquote professionalism or manner or cadence of speech. They don't necessarily care about seeing other people that look like them in similar spaces. They don't care about redistributing power. They just want to be white. Freedom for them is their approximation to whiteness. How much can they put on whiteness? How much can they sit at a table and talk the same talk that their white masters talk? That, for a lot of black people in corporate America, is freedom. But that's not freedom to me. A lot of black folks have been conditioned and encouraged to simply pursue the seats that white people sit in so that they can behave like white people historically have behaved in corporate America. And that's just not it for me. So the whole idea around like all skin folk, not kinfolk, like that's where it comes from for me. There are a very select number of people that I've seen in those seats who are truly here to live as they climb. And that's honestly, if you ever go back and you listen to my interview with Marty Rogers, like that's why I hold him in such high regard and high esteem. He's one of the rarest ones I've ever seen. The same thing goes for Matamba Austin. But they're rare. They're rare. Carolyn Johnson. I'm not just saying that because I work at Diversity Inc. Like, those people are rare. They're rare. But I'm going to challenge you that when you're sitting in front of that line and you're excited because you're next in line to get whatever it is you're about to go get, that when you look behind you in that line and you see other people that look like you in that line, but in the back, in the very end, that you see yourself in those people. That's my challenge to you. That's my challenge to you. This has been Zach. We live in corporate. I love y'all. Take care. Peace.
Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.